What's up guys, welcome back. Today's video bears a little bit of explanation right here at the top because I'm doing a couple things at the same time. First off, you guys may have seen me build this system, which is the about $1,150 build in the Cooler Master Masterbox Q500L, which I did just a week or two ago. This was my monthly build for April, but I've decided to sort of reconfigure it because we now have a new graphics card that has just launched, the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1650, which is a $150 graphics card, but NVIDIA didn't actually post drivers for the press to use. So on launch day for this card, there are no actual benchmarks that you guys can look at to say, is that a good card or is it a bad card? By the time you watch this video, there will be some more benchmarks out on this. But all this is to say, I have decided to do a couple things for today's video. One is I'm going to be reconfiguring this system in the Masterbox Q300L, which is a $40 version of the case versus the Q500L. Also, it's micro ATX, which was the original intent for this system. Also, I'm going to be answering the question in a follow-up video where I do testing of which graphics card you should pair with a $600 build like this, because the new system is going to retail for about $600 for all the parts inside. The 1650 is $150, but we also have the Radeon RX 570, which has been out for a while, but you can now also get for about $150. Which one is faster? Which one should you drop into a system if your budget is around $600? Today we're going to put the system together, or sort of rebuild the system, and then, like I said, I'll follow up and do some testing. Excellent! So let me do sort of an awkward rundown of parts here. First off, graphics card, of course, is going to be this Zotac GeForce GTX 1650. This is the gaming version, and I believe this does not require supplemental power. That's one of the selling points of the 1650, is it has a pretty low power requirement. It can run off of the 75 watts provided by the PCI Express bus. I might be swapping this RX 570. This is just the only one I have on hand here. It's a 4 gig version. There are 8 gig versions of the RX 570, so if I can find one for 150 bucks, I'll drop that in instead. The rest of the parts are already installed in the Q500L. I'm going to be disassembling that to drop it into the Q300L, so that's a savings of $20 versus the Q500, and of course it will actually be micro ATX, so that'll work with our B450M Steel Legend motherboard from ASRock. The graphics card we used originally is an RTX 2070. That's $500, and it's a $600 build, so obviously we can't use that anymore. The processor is a Ryzen 7 2700, which is going to cost over $200. It's a good 8-core 16-thread CPU, and it does use the more refined manufacturing process 12 nanometer that the second-gen Ryzen stuff uses. However, we're going to be taking advantage of the low prices currently available for first-gen Ryzen stuff. I have a Ryzen 7 1700 here, which we're going to be using for today, but in the parts list I have the Ryzen 7 1600, which is 6 cores, 12 threads, and you can get for about $115 right now, which is an insanely good deal. You can get really good deals on the 1700 as well, so if you need the extra cores and threads, consider dropping that in for a few more dollars. But that is where some more of our price savings is going to come in, and by and large, the rest of the stuff we're going to use is the same. So we got the same Cooler Master MWE Gold 650 watt power supply, which you can get for about $55 after mail-in rebate. We've got the same memory kits. You want 16 gigs or 2x8 gigs of 3200 speed Ryzen compatible memory, and our FlareX kit is doing the job there. I'm going to leave the Intel 6 series SSD in there, which is about $65 if you go for the 512 gig version of it right now. You can save another $15 by going with a standard SATA SSD, and that will not affect your gaming performance. And then of course at the back, the Q300L, just the $20 cheaper version of the Q500L here. And part of my reason going for this decision too is that this was originally a $1,150 system. After I built this, I checked out the Gamers Nexus review on the Q500L, which I will link down in the description if you guys want to check it out. The airflow on this case is not the best. So as a result, it's going to be better suited for a lower power system like a $600-ish rig like I'm setting up today, rather than trying to wedge more power into it with like an 8-core 16-thread processor and an RTX 2070. So I'm thinking the $600 configuration will work better, and now I'm going to put it all together. The initial build has been disassembled, so now we have the real parts list for today, which I've already kind of gone over everything, so I'm not going to go over it again. But since the motherboard is already pretty much assembled, I'm pretty much going to be removing the existing RGB heatsink fan. I think I'm going to keep using this because you can get a Wraith Spire that will have effectively the same performance with at least a 1700 like I'm using. I went to all that trouble of rotating this, so I kind of want to leave it, and it looks nice when it's lit up too. That said though, time to get back to work on the rebuild. So other than swapping in the different CPU at this point, it's been pretty much a transplant out of the Q500L and into the Q300L. The cases are really, really similar in most respects. A couple things to point out. The input outputs at the back here on the Q300L are these temporary ones that snap off. I'd recommend snapping those off before you install the motherboard, just a minor thing. But also this case only ships with one fan, just like the Q500. So going to be adding another 140mm fan at the front. The front intake on this case is kind of blocked off by these perforations here. This is what Gamers Nexus discovered. There's not a whole lot of room for airflow here, but we at least want to have something active up against there pulling in some fresh air. And who knows, maybe people who get this case in the future can figure out some decent mods there to open up the airflow a little bit. I don't think that'd be too hard to do. At this point though, just have a couple steps left to do. Gonna install the fan at the front and then install the graphics card and get everything wired up and plugged in. Front intake fan is installed. This is a 140mm fan, and this is kind of making me lean a little bit more towards maybe doing a follow-up mod on this case when I test it to just cut out a big hole right here and allow plenty of room for airflow. I'll think about it. Let me know in the comments if you guys think I should do that. So this build, being sort of a rebuild, has come together pretty quickly, and I'm now just ready to install the graphics card, which again is this Zotac gaming version of the GTX 1650. And the 1650, I think, is gonna have a decent amount of discussion on it in the next few days and probably weeks, because for a lot of people who are going to go with a discrete graphics card, about $150 is kind of that entry-level price. I think for people who are doing a more healthy budget, maybe $700 to $900 total for the whole system, you're definitely going to want to look at something higher end for a graphics card. 1660 and 1660 Ti have proven to be very good values for the money that you pay for them. Can't 100% say that for this card quite yet. Also, there's going to be a few variants of this card. This one, for example, is a more entry-level version, so it's got a plastic shroud, single fan on top. It's only about 161mm long measured from the bracket when it comes to the PCB. The plastic shroud extends a little bit beyond that, so maybe 165, but this should fit in really, really small form factor systems. Also, a benefit for small form factor and lower power systems is going to be the fact that there's no supplemental power requirement for this. It gets all the power via the 75 watts delivered via the PCI Express bus, which is this shorty part of it right there, by the way. That's where the power comes from. There will also be higher end versions of this card too, though, some that do have supplemental power, and those will probably be able to run at higher clock speeds. I'll be testing this, so I'll report on the clock speeds, but some of the things that we have question marks about when it comes to the 1650 are going to be the CUDA core count. You get 896 CUDA cores with the 1650, and that is about 30% less than the 1660, where you have 1408. Also, the core and boost clocks are 1485 and 1665 respectively, and that is again about 100 megahertz slower than with the 1660. So you might be able to get a 1650 that performs a little bit better and overclocks a little bit better if you get one that has that supplemental power. For us though, it at least simplifies the installation, because all I have to do is drop it into the slot here and there's no extra power required. So I got the graphics card installed. The back of this case has one of these external mounting plates, so you actually want to screw through the mounting plate in order to get everything in there. But once it's all in there, it's actually pretty secure there. And now that everything's installed here, this case is feeling pretty solid as well. Even though it's a $40 case, and as I've mentioned before, you know, the steel is not exactly super thick in certain areas. When it's all together, because it's compact and because they've gotten rolled portions around the edges here, it actually stays together really well and very flexible. As I already mentioned, you know, you can take this I/O panel and move it to the top or the bottom or the side if you want to, and rotate the side panel window along with it. I feel much better about this build as a $600 build than the one I did in the Q500L, which is a $1,150 build. Maybe I'll come back to that one and do an updated version of that with a different case that I feel is a little bit more suitable. This one though, I'm happy with, and I've even got you know, a decent job going on the cable management here around the other side as well. I haven't tucked everything back in there. Once the side panel goes on, it will do that. And I've added this supplemental PCI Express power connector so that if I test the 1650 versus an RX 570, we can get a comparison. And the RX 570 does require extra power. That's one of the trade-offs there. It's going to use more power. It's not going to be as efficient as the 1650, but I will talk about that in a follow-up video. All right, everything's put together. Let's hit the power button. Fan might be hitting something. I'll fix that. actually conflicting with the front of the case. So happy news, the fan up at the front was just over tightened, so it compressed the rubber standoffs and actually had it conflicting with the front of the case, but I loosened that up and now it's just fine. Spinning, providing some airflow to the rest of the components in the system. So guys, that's pretty much gonna wrap it up for this build. I am much happier, I think, with this configuration than with the configuration I recently did in the 500 series version of this case. And it's mainly because I feel like this is more practical. Again, you could put together roughly this same system for about $600, and I've put a parts list for that down in the video's description if you guys wanna check it out. I was comparing this to the $500 builds that I was doing maybe a year ago or 2 years ago. Those had to rely on integrated graphics, or they had to rely on older Intel processors that were like dual core, 4-thread. Now we've managed to fit a 6-core, 12-thread processor in here. We've got a $150 graphics card that is hopefully faster than the $150 graphics cards of 2 years ago. And we have a ton of expansion room because, of course, with this socket, you can upgrade to an 8-core, 16-thread AMD Ryzen 7 processor. You also have a ton of room for a larger or more powerful graphics card in here, which would also be supported by this power supply, which is a 650-watt power supply. You could get away with a 550-watt in this build, by the way. You've got support for M.2 NVMe drives. You've got expandability for adding some additional drives to the system too. So I think this is a system that gets my seal of approval at least, but I shouldn't do that before I've actually tested it fully. So stay tuned for a follow-up video while I test this system with the 1650 in it, compare the RX 570. Hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see that video when it comes out, as well as all the other videos on my YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.